When two brothers retreat into the woods of Appalachian Tennessee to forage for ginseng in 2021, they vanish without a trace. Their unexplained absence haunts their family and community in this episode of Last Seen Alive. Thanks for listening to Last Seen Alive. I'm your host, Leah, crime analyst by day and true crime storyteller by night.
And as always, I'm your co-host, Scott.
This case was suggested to us by someone you all know, my brother Jake, the forensic investigator who's made guest appearances on a couple of past episodes. Thanks for the case suggestion, Jake. Daniel Scott Hawkins, who went by Scott, and Tracy Hawkins were last seen alive on August 6th, 2021. They were 51 and 44 years old, respectively, at the time. They were brothers and resided together in rural Campbell County, Tennessee. Campbell County is located in the northeastern part of the state, along the Kentucky border and a little under an hour's drive north of the nearest city, Knoxville. The terrain consists of the abundantly green, rolling mountains that characterize southern Appalachia, and the place has a history rooted in the coal mining industry. Today, although there are still some active mines, mining activity has been greatly reduced in the area compared to its historical peak. Like nearly all formerly booming coal mining towns, economic conditions in Campbell County have long been challenging, and the poverty rate there is nearly twice the U.S. average. On the other hand, the unemployment rate in Campbell County is 30% less than the U.S. average, indicating that the people who reside there work hard for what they have. This fact will surprise no one who's familiar with the economic legacy of coal country. And this is where Scott and Tracy were from. Specifically, they hailed from an area within Campbell County known as Rocky Top. Yes, like the famous bluegrass song from the 60s. The community has gone through some name changes, though, so I'm not truly sure whether it's the Rocky Top the song was referring to. Even so, it's a beautiful corner of Tennessee, just like the Rocky Top in the song. As avid outdoorsmen, Tracy and Scott were both intimately familiar with their scenic corner of Tennessee. In fact, for them, familiarity with the outdoors wasn't just a byproduct of leisure or hobby pursuits, it was integral to the way they produced income. That's because they dug ginseng for a profit. Actually, that's how they made their living, according to what their mom told WBIR 10 News.
Yeah, we both know people that go out and farm for ginseng or hunt for ginseng, not necessarily farm for it. And it's a very engaged adventure.
It takes a lot of physical effort, more than you would think if you're not familiar with the process. But yes, we do know people who dig for wild ginseng, and we actually do know people who farm it as well.
Oh.
Both are possible. Ginseng is a slow-growing plant prized for its root, which has a reputation for medicinal properties, especially in the U.S. and much of Asia. Ginseng is also native to both Asia and the U.S. There are several different species native to various nations in Asia and just one species in North America. American ginseng's native range includes woodlands in the eastern U.S. as well as part of the Midwest. However, it's most abundant in Appalachia and the Ozarks. Given enough time and patience, it can also be intentionally cultivated in the right environment. It requires rich, well-drained soil high in organic matter, preferably on a wooded north or east-facing slope, as well as ample shade and relatively cool, humid air, which makes the mountains of East Tennessee the perfect setting for ginseng to thrive naturally. Of course, this also makes it the perfect setting for industrious foragers to dig up a profit. American ginseng isn't just known for its medicinal value, but for its monetary value. A pound of wild, dry ginseng roots may sell for $500 or more, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Demand for American ginseng is driven largely by the East Asian market, where it's especially prized. So, Appalachia is richer in wild ginseng than anywhere else in the nation, while also being poorer, monetarily speaking, than almost any other region in the nation. It's easy to understand where this dichotomy leads, to some fierce competition over a naturally occurring resource.
Yeah, when we're talking about this, it's reminding me of talking about morel hunting in Washington and how competitive that can get.
Yeah, actually, I was going to bring that up later in the episode. We did an episode about a woman, Dr. Hildegard Hendrickson, who vanished while foraging for morels, and we talked about how cutthroat that can be. So imagine that by a factor of 100, and that's ginseng. So, Tracy and Scott weren't the only ginseng foragers operating in Campbell County, not by a long shot. They knew this, of course. They'd been digging ginseng for a long time. In fact, digging ginseng was part of their family's legacy. Their family had been in the area for generations, and their late father's obituary notes his love of foraging for the plant. Digging ginseng is exactly what Tracy and Scott set out to do on August 6th. Anyone listening who's familiar with Tennessee's laws regarding the conservation and harvest of ginseng will have noticed that this date falls several weeks outside of the legal harvest season, which runs from September 1st to December 31st. During that 3-month window of time, quote, the collection of wild ginseng for sale or personal use in Tennessee is permitted on private lands with permission from the landowner, end quote. That's according to the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Outside of that time period, harvesting ginseng is a misdemeanor offense. A misdemeanor offense that Scott and Tracy would hardly be the first to commit. There's a lot of law breaking that goes on when it comes to digging ginseng. We'll get into that more later. For now, just know that regulations around ginseng harvesting are strict because the plant takes years to fully mature, generally between 5 to 10 years in the wild, and improper or premature harvesting, otherwise known as poaching, can be devastating to plant populations. The laws exist to ensure that the wild plant, which is in danger of becoming extinct because of the intense demand, isn't wiped out. You'll also note that the law regarding harvest times doesn't mention public lands, and that's because it's unlawful to harvest ginseng from public lands in Tennessee at any time.
That's actually a little bit surprising to me.
That's actually the case in many states, including our own. Scott and Tracy weren't heading to public lands, though, but to private. In order to reach their preferred foraging grounds, they left home at approximately 9 a.m. and drove just a few minutes to the Holly Gamble funeral home sitting on Highway 116. Once there, they parked across from it. This might sound like an odd location, but it wasn't the funeral home they were concerned with. It was the acres of dense woods behind the building. Those are the woods that Tracy and Scott hiked into that day in search of ginseng. When they'd left home, they'd told their mom, Donna, who was widowed and who they resided with, that they'd be back by dinner time, specifically sometime between 6 and 6:30. That would give them a solid 9 hours to forage for ginseng. And when it comes to foraging for ginseng, 9 hours isn't a great deal of time. The plant can be tricky to spot in the dense forest undergrowth, and although the roots can be very lucrative pound for pound, it takes many of them to equal a pound freshly dug, let alone dried. The amount of time one could spend searching and digging for ginseng in a suitable Appalachian habitat is virtually limitless. And when one does find it, it's typically located on steep, sloping, and difficult to navigate terrain that's also home to briars, nettles, snakes, and irritating insects. I don't dig ginseng myself, but I frequently forage for other plants and fungi in the same Appalachian habitats where it grows wild, so I know the terrain, and it's not easy, particularly at the height of summer. Success requires doing your best impression of a mountain goat and becoming very comfortable with being very uncomfortable for prolonged periods of time. Whether or not Tracy and Scott had a certain spot or spots already in mind in the woods they set out into on August 6th, or went in hoping to discover some new place, I don't know. All I know is that when dinner time rolled around, there was no sign of the brothers back at the family home. This worried their mom, Donna, to whom they'd promised to be home by dinner. And sure, the brothers were middle-aged, plenty old enough to do as they pleased. But failing to return home when they'd promised to was out of character. So Donna waited about a day and a half, and when there was still no sign of them, she reported them missing to local law enforcement. In response, the Campbell County Sheriff's Office organized search efforts focusing on the wooded area near the funeral home. They had searchers on foot, on ATVs, and even in the air via drone. They also deployed canines, whether those canines were scent tracking canines or human remains detection canines or a combination of both, no source that I could locate specified. Either way, according to reporting by WYSH Radio, the Campbell County Sheriff's Office was joined by several other agencies, including the Rocky Top Police Department, the La Follette Rescue Squad, and the Anderson Rescue Squad. Additionally, multiple family members of the brothers and numerous other people from their community assisted in the search. According to WBIR 10 News, one of the brothers' cousins, a woman named Cassie, worked with the sheriff's office to coordinate civilian search efforts. But despite all the people, canines, and drones searching for Tracy and Scott, and the fact that the searching went on daily for more than a week, neither of them were located. Their vehicle, however, was located almost immediately after they were reported missing, right where they'd left it. They'd driven a burgundy-colored 2006 Chevy Trailblazer, which belonged to their mom, and had parked it across from the funeral home, and that was exactly where searchers found it. The vehicle was empty and yielded no real clues as to where the missing brothers might have gone. However, there was one potentially odd detail. The vehicle's windshield had been damaged. An article from WBIR 10 News mentions it, saying, quote, "The windshield is shattered, just like the heart of their mother, Donna, who waits for her sons to drive the truck back home," end quote. Now, I say potentially odd because it's difficult to tell from that context whether the windshield damage was new and therefore a clue to the brothers' fate, or just old damage that the writer of that article commented on merely as a segue into their mom's heartbreak. I wish I had more information on the windshield damage to share that I could tell you whether or not it's relevant to the case, but unfortunately, I don't. There are a few shortcomings with the reporting on this case like that.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I think if it was new, more than one outlet might have picked up on it, or it might have been mentioned in more frequent context.
I had the exact same thought. So I didn't want to not mention it in case it was relevant, but at the same time, take it with a few handfuls of salt because it could have been like that for some time for all we know. Another item of uncertainty, at least for me, is an image of Tracy and Scott that was captured on a trail cam. The Campbell County Sheriff's Office obtained the trail cam stills and shared them with news outlets, some of which have posted the photos along with articles on the brothers' disappearance. This initially led me to believe that the images were taken on the day of their disappearance, on whatever land they'd been on. But then I realized that the timestamp on the trail cam photos is August 5th, 2021 at 6:10 p.m. That's the day before they went missing, which again was August 6th.
I was going to say, it should be pretty easy to narrow that down. I know with our trail cams, every image is timestamped because how else are you going to keep track of everything?
Right. And we've taken the time to make sure that the date and time are correct on our cameras. But, did the owners of this camera, is the timestamp on the images a day off? And are the images actually from the day of their disappearance? Or were the images really captured the day before on a different ginseng foraging venture? If so, why exactly are they being shared by news outlets? Is it just to give a super up-to-date picture of the brothers?
Possibly.
Frustratingly, I don't know because those news outlets, much like with the windshield damage detail, did not provide any context. In any case, at the time of this recording in the summer of 2025, nearly 4 years have passed since Tracy and Scott went missing and no trace of them has been found. For their heartbroken mom, Donna, this can only mean one thing: that her boys are no longer alive. On the 3rd anniversary of her son's disappearance in 2024, she told WBIR 10 News, quote, "I know where their souls are. God has told me that. They're in heaven. But it's the part of not knowing what's happened to them," end quote. And when it comes to what happened to them in those woods, there are multiple possibilities. More on those next. And now, back to Tracy and Scott's story. When 51 and 44-year-old Scott and Tracy Hawkins failed to return home from a day of foraging for ginseng in their corner of Appalachian Tennessee, their mom reported them missing, prompting multi-agency search efforts that lasted for more than a week. Despite the efforts made by local law enforcement, local rescue squads, and an array of civilian volunteers, no trace of the brothers was located, aside from their vehicle, that is, which was left right where they'd parked it. Scott and Tracy's mom, Donna, believes that her sons are deceased and has done her best to make peace with that fact, leaning heavily on her faith. However, not knowing what happened to them and not being able to give them proper burials has weighed heavily on her. When it comes to theories regarding what happened to her sons, an obvious one is that they might have fallen victim to foul play. The fact that both men went missing, not just one, seems to highlight the very real possibility that this was the case. After all, an accident or medical event, if one had occurred, would most likely have only impacted one brother, leaving the other free to seek help.
Yeah, that's my biggest indicator of foul play also. I mean,
Sure.
When you're dealing with being out in that harsh environment, there's so many things that can happen, but the likelihood of it happening to both of them is almost incomprehensible.
And neither one of these able-bodied men being able to go and summon help, it seems pretty unlikely.
And then not finding their bodies also.
Well, it is very dense vegetation and fairly rough terrain, so, it's possible. It can be very difficult to search for things in that context. But yeah, that adds to it. Now, foul play, on the other hand, well, it could have impacted both brothers, perhaps taking both of their lives. And it doesn't take much imaginative license to think up scenarios that might have resulted in foul play. Anytime you have people going out into a remote environment in search of limited, monetarily valuable resources, the possibility for foul play exists. This is true on any kind of land, be it public or private. There are always people who are willing to break the law, sometimes violently, in pursuit of financial gain. And then there's the elephant in the room, which is that Tracy and Scott may have been trespassing and therefore poaching while foraging that day. The wooded land behind the funeral home is divided up into a number of plots, most of them quite large, and they're all privately owned. To the best of my knowledge, Tracy and Scott didn't have permission from any of the landowners in that area to dig ginseng on their property.
Poaching on private property, it wouldn't be the first time this has happened for any type of species, realistically.
Yeah, be it plant or animal, sure.
It happens all the time, unfortunately.
And because ginseng may only be harvested legally in Tennessee on private land, this means that ginseng foragers who don't own land themselves are always operating outside of the law unless they're able to secure permission from a landowner to dig for it. Such permission can be difficult to obtain for obvious reasons. So, landless ginseng diggers often operate outside of the law, either by illegally digging on public lands or by illegally digging on private lands where they haven't been welcomed.
Just to expand on that, even if they have permission from one of the landowners, it's very easy to cross over into the next person's property and poach. So even if they had permission from one of the landowners, it still could have led to a poaching situation.
Right, that's very true. And just to be clear, I don't know what plot of land they were on when they vanished. I mean, I suppose nobody truly does since they haven't been found, but I gather that people in the town know and may suspect a certain landowner, but that is not official information. So that's that. So trespassing, poaching, it sounds like that was what was going on here. As we discuss this, please know that it is not my intent to vilify the Hawkins brothers for any extra legal actions. The fact that they were breaking laws, which we of course don't condone, while relevant to the case, is not the point of this episode, so we won't be harping on it. The point is that they're missing and likely deceased, possibly as a result of foul play. Regardless of the context, their grieving family deserves answers. With all of that being said, the possibility that Tracy and Scott may have been murdered by an angry landowner is very real. People can be very territorial and very violent. For some anecdotal context, I grew up with a parent whose job often took them into the Appalachian backwoods onto wooded or rural lands. They weren't trespassing, they were there legally, but that doesn't mean that they were always welcome. Sometimes they were received with hostility or even violence. I remembered hearing these stories in my younger years, and as I was researching this episode, I checked in with my dad to make sure I wasn't misremembering anything or over-dramatizing it all. When I asked him whether he was ever met with hostility while out on job sites, he said, and I quote, "Yes, my God, yes. Threatened, cussed out, even shots fired near me to run me off."
I think it's natural for people to be suspicious whenever you see somebody on your property. Like, you don't know why they're there. You don't know what's going on with them. Like, there's cause for questioning it, but just straight off going out with shots fired, that's a bit much.
So, needless to say, it wouldn't surprise me if Scott and Tracy fell victim to violence at the hands of a landowner. However, an angry landowner is just one possibility. It would be naive for us to assume that Scott and Tracy were the only trespassers on land abundant in ginseng. The fact is, a lot of people trespass in pursuit of ginseng with no regard whatsoever for the law or for others. Scott, we have some family friends who carefully cultivate wild simulated ginseng on their own wooded property and who have recently had thieves come in and wipe out their entire population of plants. I'm talking thousands of dollars worth of plants that each take years to reach maturity, just gone.
The thought of investing so much money and time into a plant that you're not going to get any return on for 5 years or so, and then to have somebody come in and steal all of that, I would be irate. I'd be furious.
Sure. Yeah, it's understandable. And of course, in the case of wild ginseng, true wild ginseng, not just wild simulated, nobody's really growing that. But nonetheless, you're waiting and you're being patient if you're planning to harvest it. It's a really precious resource that takes a long, long time to reach maturity.
And especially if this person knows that it's on their property and they're waiting to be able to harvest it themselves.
Sure, and I'm sure that's not the case with every landowner, but for some it may be. Now, although all of this may sound foreign to those from outside the regions where this highly coveted plant grows, I can attest it's a very real problem in present-day Appalachia. And this means that there can be serious conflict not just among landowners and foragers, but among foragers and foragers, regardless of whether or not any of the involved parties have the legal right to be on the land they meet on. We all know people or stories of people who feel that they have a claim to certain land, be it for hunting, foraging, whatever, that they don't own, but nonetheless, they feel very strongly about this.
Especially when you've been in a certain area for generations and it's this is the way it's always been mentality.
Yes, that's really prevalent. Ownership in the law is all very well and good when it's applied to their property. But when it comes to other people's property, they may think, oh, well, my grandfather came and did this 60 years ago. Why can't I?
Or the property sells, new owners come in, land changes hands, and nobody bothers to keep up with who's owning what or getting permission from landowners.
Or they just don't care.
Or they just don't care because it's remote in the middle of whatever, and you'll just deal with it the way you deal with it.
Right. So it's possible that Scott and Tracy may have encountered other ginseng diggers and may have been subjected to violence at their hands. As you brought up earlier, Scott, we've discussed to some degree the lawlessness that can crop up around wild harvests in our past episode on the disappearance of Dr. Hildegard Hendrickson, who went missing while foraging for morel mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. The bottom line is, if there's money to be dug up, there are crimes to be committed, and someone will inevitably commit those crimes. And then I'd be remiss not to note that property owners or other ginseng diggers are not the only possible hostile parties Tracy and Scott could potentially have encountered in the woods. As we've discussed in some past episodes, like our episode on the disappearance of Mike Herron, which also occurred in rural East Tennessee, illegal marijuana grows are often conducted in remote woodlands and can present a significant safety hazard to anyone who stumbles upon them. It's not just ginseng that thrives in the East Tennessee climate. Campbell County has been a hotbed of illegal cannabis growing. In fact, in 2009, authorities discovered the largest illegal marijuana grow ever in Tennessee history right in rural Campbell County. They found and eradicated more than 350,000 plants.
That is a massive grow.
That's many millions of dollars worth of marijuana. And in 2014, authorities discovered and destroyed a cache of more than 1,100 plants growing in another remote area of Campbell County. And although that was just a small fraction, less than 1% of the grow we just mentioned, even that was worth more than $1 million, according to WBIR 10 News. We're talking huge amounts of money here, huge amounts of money, period, and especially huge amounts of money for the area. And it's a lot more money than anyone could ever make by digging ginseng by a long shot. Compared to ginseng, cannabis grows at the speed of light, with entire harvests germinating, maturing, and being harvested in mere months. And make no mistake, people can and do kill to keep grows like the ones we just mentioned secret. According to the U.S. Forest Service, quote, "The dangers of encountering cannabis growers or entering a grow site cannot be overemphasized," end quote.
No, I mean, whenever I think about anything of this size, I think about, how quickly you have to discover it because it can be gone, like you said, in a few months. So even law enforcement trying to find it in that time frame is going out on a limb. And then I think about all the times we've talked about Humboldt County privately and how dangerous it is to go out into the woods there because of how violently those grows are protected.
Right. And, that's a very famous part of the country. I would even say the most famous for outdoor grows like this. It's probably what people think of Northern California, but in Appalachia, it's actually huge as well. And not only do these grows represent enormous profits, they also represent the threat of felony charges. If the growers are identified, you can go away for quite some time for this. As a quick side note here, while we're on the subject, If you're an avid woodland hiker or outdoors person, especially if you like to venture off trail, you should know the signs of an illegal grow for your own safety, and we'll get into why here in just a moment. We've linked to an article from the U.S. Forest Service outlining the signs in the show notes. Please give it a read and be safe out there. While researching the protective measures illegal woodland growers take to protect their crops, I located a 2007 government report by the National Drug Intelligence Center titled Appalachia High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Drug Market Analysis. The report detailed facts and statistics regarding illegal cannabis grows in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, aka the heart of Appalachia. Here's what the report had to say about the security measures taken to protect those grow sites. Quote, cannabis cultivators frequently use camouflage, counter-surveillance techniques, and booby traps to protect their outdoor grow sites. Law enforcement officials in Kentucky report that cannabis cultivators commonly camouflage marijuana crops by planting cannabis under tree canopies to conceal the crop from aerial surveillance, or by commingling cannabis with legitimate crops. These sites are often protected by armed guards who conduct counter-surveillance. Moreover, the use of booby traps significantly increased in 2006 in smaller, usually unattended outdoor cannabis plots in Kentucky. In fact, some cannabis growers used punji sticks, which may be camouflaged by leaves and brush or incorporated into pits and explosive devices to reduce the risk of crop theft. End quote.
One thing that's going through my mind is 2007 to now, there's been a significant technological increase. And we've already mentioned the one that comes to my mind first in this episode once, and that's trail cam.
They're able to monitor those sites even more effectively.
Yeah, nowadays you have cell cams. Like whenever we set up our cameras, they run off of multiple satellite networks and we'll send it via whichever one is most effective. And they'll send you a text message whenever you have new images, and ours will even send you pictures.
Right. So again, on that safety note I mentioned earlier, if you're a woodland hiker, you should know that if you stumble upon a site like this, it's very likely that the people maintaining it already know you've probably already been captured on a clandestine camera and they've immediately received a notification. So you need to get out really quick.
Yes, it's even more dangerous now than it was in 2007 when they felt the need to publish this article.
Yes. Now, for anyone wondering what punji sticks are, Scott, I know you know it's one of your childhood fears.
It haunted my nightmares.
Yeah, sort of like quicksand that haunted all of us millennial children.
Way to just combine the two for me. Thanks.
Sorry. So for anyone who doesn't know, punji sticks are these sharpened sticks positioned so that they're rising up from the bottom of a concealed subterranean pit. The idea is that a hapless pedestrian steps on the camouflage pit cover, which could be made of vegetation or boards, falls into the pit and is skewered by the spikes, most likely in the foot or leg areas. These traps are often used in guerrilla warfare. You may have heard of them being used in injuring soldiers in the Vietnam War. All one needs to construct a trap like this is a shovel for digging the pit and a knife or some sort of blade for whittling sticks into spikes. And while having a foot or leg skewered is bad enough, the bigger the trap, the wider the bodily area that's at risk. Punji stick traps can seriously injure and even kill victims. Another report from the National Drug Intelligence Center goes into more detail on the subject of booby traps, saying, quote, cannabis growers frequently carry weapons, place animal traps among plants, post guard dogs, and hang fish hooks from monofilament line around the perimeter of the fields to protect their crops. Cannabis growers also use metal spikes and punji stakes placed randomly throughout the cannabis field to injure or kill intruders. Law enforcement officers in Tennessee occasionally seize unmanned firearms that are rigged to fire in the direction of intruders. End quote.
I mean, you rig up one of those firearms connected to that fishing hook and you've got a victim just waiting to be removed from the scene.
Right. It's cartoonishly violent and malicious. As you can see, illegal grows are serious and dangerous business in the area. Not because cannabis is inherently evil. Please don't let that be your takeaway from this. We don't care about your opinion of cannabis. It's because where there's an illegal market, there's money to be made. And where there's money to be made illegally, there is violent crime. On that note, marijuana is illegal in Tennessee, with the exception of a recent law allowing for medical usage, and throughout much of the South, which helps the illegal market and all the crime that comes with it to thrive. While we're on this subject, though, it's worth mentioning that illegal grows aren't the only hazardous secrets one could potentially stumble across in this type of environment. There are other types of clandestine operations. Meth labs and moonshine stills are also sometimes concealed in the woods of East Tennessee, and the owners may be fiercely protective.
I think it's hard not to think of moonshine being made out in the mountains in private,
Sure.
away from anybody, whenever you think about potentially illegal activity happening in Appalachia.
Yeah, well, for us, maybe for those unfamiliar with the region, yeah, moonshine still thrives. It's not just some old-timey practice that was forgotten along with the prohibition. It's a big cultural thing. It's still going, and there are still plenty of stills out there, and people are protective of them because they're, one, valuable, and two, illegal. For most still owners, their still is a primary source of income. And while illegal brewing operations generally aren't sought out by law enforcement with quite the same fervor as illegal cannabis grows, they're still something that could potentially land their owners in federal prison if they were to be prosecuted. And still operators are sometimes prosecuted. You can find modern news stories on such cases in East Tennessee with minimal effort if you're curious.
We're not talking like somebody that makes a little bit for themselves in a backyard here. We're talking about people that have an entire process that this is their entire livelihood.
Yeah, there's some fairly large operations where the product is made for sale. It's their livelihood, like you said. On the other hand, I don't think I need to convince anyone that methamphetamine production is a modern problem, so I'm not going to elaborate on that one. Despite the perils we've just discussed, there are other possibilities when it comes to what might have happened to Scott and Tracy, possibilities that don't involve human malice. The caveat with these possibilities is that they'd be a lot more likely to happen to a solo hiker. For example, what if one of the brothers experienced a medical emergency or injury while out in the woods? While that's possible, if it did occur, the other would presumably be able to go fetch help. So it seems that such an occurrence would be unlikely to result in the permanent disappearance of both brothers. This leaves us to wonder, what kind of natural mishap could possibly have disabled both brothers, preventing them from making it out of the woods? I believe there are some possibilities.
Well, I'll go ahead and say my primary thought that's been in the back of my mind this whole time, which I can almost guarantee it's one that you're going to talk about in more detail, which would be some sort of rock slide where they could have gone down the hill, gotten injured, something like that.
You know what? Actually, that was not on my little list I've got here of possibilities. So I'm glad you brought that up, because now that you mention it, that seems fairly solid, and I had not thought of that.
Okay, well then, to expand on this, the one thing that I will say against it, which I cannot wrap my head around, is how one would get both of them. Because if you're out there searching for ginseng for your livelihood, the likelihood that both brothers would be in this isolated area at the same time seems a little bit far-fetched. Because if you're trying to make the most out of this venture into collecting ginseng, it's not necessarily a two-person job. So it would make more sense for them to spread out so they could cover more area.
It really depends. I don't know what their usual operating procedure was like. I don't know if they had a patch where they had some density that they were both sitting there working. Without those details, it's difficult to say. But keep in mind that if one brother, was victim to, a landslide, fell down some rocks, got hurt in some way, the other would probably instinctually go after them to try to help them. And that could result in both of them falling victim to something like that. I know one time I got sucked into some river rapids and my brother came in to try to save me. It's impossible. The water was too strong. I had to tell him to let me go. And I made it to the end of the rapids eventually, downriver. I survived.
This podcast would be far more dull if you hadn't.
I like to think that this podcast I made would be pretty boring without me. But we would still have the audio engineering provided by you, Scott. Now, I started my list off with a possibility that people will always raise when it comes to woodland stuff, which is animals. Now, when it comes to animals, it's probably pretty unlikely that a mammal like a bear would fatally attack both men. Possible, sure, but unlikely. The same is true for venomous snakes. A bite is a matter of last resort. In most cases, bears and snakes alike would prefer to flee from a threat rather than to fight.
Let's just point out for those unfamiliar, we don't have grizzly bears out here. These are black bears. They're easily scared off.
Yeah, in most cases, yes.
And they'd most likely climb a tree if they really felt that threatened.
Sure.
Especially if it was two men.
Yeah. Now, I'm intimately familiar with hiking in Appalachia, and although I've seen nearly every animal that inhabits the region, still holding out on Sasquatch and mountain lion, and don't tell me mountain lions don't live here, because they do.
They absolutely do.
Right. I've only ever been attacked by one. It's the meanest and most territorial by far, and it's a lot less exciting than a bear or a rattlesnake. At the same time, it's my arch nemesis. It's what I'm always the most worried about when hiking. I'm talking about flying, stinging insects, yellow jackets, and hornets, nature's jerks. I've stumbled upon ground-dwelling yellow jackets while hiking and can attest that they are the worst. Of course, there are also hornets that build those big, papery nests in trees, but their ground-dwelling cousins are especially treacherous because their nests are concealed, often constructed in abandoned rodent burrows, and easy to accidentally tread on or near, and their residents are notoriously aggressive. So if someone told me that they were attacked by an animal, or animals, I should say, in this region, yellow jackets or hornets would be my first guess. And they could and would attack two people at once in a swarm. This could potentially be deadly, particularly if the affected party had an allergy to the venom or was simply stung a large number of times. Imagine trying to hike miles over uneven, densely vegetated terrain in the August heat and humidity after being repeatedly stung, especially if you were suffering from facial swelling that impaired your vision.
My natural thought would be them trying to run from a swarm in the dense vegetation or loose rocks, like I mentioned earlier, and it being a side effect.
Right. It's your natural instinct. No matter the terrain, you're being attacked. Run. Now, I'm by no means saying that this is what happened to Tracy and Scott. Of course, but this is a hazard that I know from my own experience is present in the region, and when it comes to animal threats, I believe it's the most realistic.
I find it much more likely than a black bear trying to take on two men.
Right.
I mean, those cuddly little guys.
They do look really cuddly.
I just want to give them a hug.
Don't do that. That's how you end up being the exception. While we're on the subject of subterranean threats, it's also worth mentioning that sinkholes or unseen cave entrances could possibly be a danger in this region. If two people were walking close enough together and encountered such a thing, they might conceivably both fall in and end up stuck. Or one could fall in and the other could come looking for them and succumb to the same fate. On this note, to the best of my knowledge, Scott and Tracy did not have cell phones on their persons to call for help with. And even if we had in this area, reception probably would have been non-existent, especially in a cave. Speaking of which, Scott, did you know that 20% of all caves in the entire U.S. are located in the state of Tennessee?
I knew it was a large amount. I didn't know it was that large.
Thanks to its abundant limestone, Tennessee is incredibly full of caves, over 10,000 of them, which is both astonishing and more than any other U.S. state. There are so many caves in Tennessee that there are basically two halves to the state, the above-ground half and the subterranean half, two very different sides of the same scenic coin. And most of the caves are located in the eastern part of the state, too. So an accident involving a cave is not exactly far-fetched. If there was anywhere in the country where such an accident was going to occur, it would be East Tennessee. On a similar note, old mine shafts can pose similar, albeit man-made, dangers. I'm not sure if there were any old mine shafts in the area where Scott and Tracy were foraging, and because I'm not exactly sure of precisely where they were hiking, that's not even something I can look into with any great specificity. All I can say is that Campbell County has a long mining history. Lastly, when talking about individuals who don't return from the woods, I'd normally raise the possibility of them getting lost and succumbing to exposure. However, in Scott and Tracy's case, that seems pretty unlikely. They had literally spent their entire lives in the woods in that area and knew how to navigate them. I assume that they exercised due caution that day and avoided making amateurish mistakes. Knowing how experienced they were in the outdoors, it seems safe to say that whatever prevented them from returning home was something unexpected, be it some kind of accident or a violent attack. Whatever happened to them, their loss, combined with the purgatory of not knowing what caused it, has been misery for their loved ones, especially their elderly mom, Donna, who was widowed just a couple years before they disappeared and she lost them too. She recently told WBIR 10 News, quote, "I know they're not coming back. I've come to reality with that, but I need to know what has happened to them. I feel like they've been forgotten. I just want some kind of closure. I'm begging whoever knows anything, please don't let me go another day begging." End quote. If you know anything about the double disappearance of Scott and Tracy Hawkins, please contact the Campbell County Sheriff's Office at 423-562-7446. Or if you prefer to remain anonymous, call 423-566-3784. And if you found this episode to be of special interest, you may want to check out our episode on the unsolved disappearance of Mike Herron. His case isn't related to Scott and Tracy's, but like them, he was an outdoorsman who vanished from the woods near his home in East Tennessee. We aired our episode on Mike's disappearance in April of 2021. You can scroll back to then in our feed to listen if you'd like.
That's all for this episode of Lasting a Life. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out our website, lastingalifepodcast.com, for photos from a story and links to sources we used to write it. While you're at it, follow us on Insta at LSA Podcast and TikTok at Lasting a Life Podcast. Episodes of Lasting Alive air every Monday. See you then. If you think bringing unsolved cases like Scott and Tracy's to the public's attention is important, please take a moment to rate or review Lasting Alive and tell your friends to check us out too. We really do appreciate it. Also, don't forget to check out our merch store where you can get an LSA t-shirt or hoodie. We donate 50% of the proceeds from every sale to the DNA Dope Project. Lasting Alive is a Studio 222 production. Research and writing for this episode is provided by you, Leah. Audio engineering and editing is provided by me, Scott.